And without further ado, let us get to our wonderful panel. Paige Williams, Valorie Burton, and Louis Alloro, change champions, best-selling authors, experts on wellness and resilience and anti-fragility. So excited to have the three of you here to have this meaningful conversation. I want to give each of you about 90 seconds to answer these three questions. What do you do? Why do you do it? Why is it important to you? And what do you hope to offer to our community today? So Paige, why don't you start us off and then we'll go across. So Valorie and Louis, you can take us home and yeah, feel free. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Sam, and great to be with everyone this morning. So what do I do? This is kind of the elevator question, right? And I practice this to try and get it down into less than 10 seconds. So basically, I help leaders learn how to thrive through disruption and change, and lead their teams effectively to do so as well. So I teach and I coach and I mentor, and my expertise comes from firstly being a leader, so very much grounded in having been a senior leader and led teams for over 20 years, internationally throughout Europe, the UK, and in Australia. But more recently then in my academic expertise in positive psychology, systems science, and more broadly kind of leadership and neuroscience as underpinning fields. So I guess what am I hoping people will take away from today is really practical strategies about how they can almost get out of their own way, because sometimes that's the biggest barrier to us feeling well, doing well, and leading well. And have some really practical, real and relatable actions that they can take so that we can, as much as possible, learn to thrive in what we're all acknowledging a pretty extraordinary uncertainty and extraordinary levels of uncertainty and extraordinary levels of disruption and change. So that's me. I'm here of service and I'm happy to answer all the questions that I can and to acknowledge the ones I can't too.
Thank you, Paige. Appreciate that. Valorie, you want to go next?
Absolutely. Well, my mission is inspiring others to live more fulfilling lives, and I do that through writing and speaking. I had an epiphany about that purpose over 20 years ago, and that's when I first started writing. And after writing and speaking for a couple of years, discovered coaching and began coaching in 2002. And with my love of learning, wanted to know, like, is there an academic and research foundation for coaching? And that's when I discovered positive psychology and went back to grad school. Lucky me, got to sit next to Louis many times while working on our graduate degree at Penn. And you know, the core of what I teach is happiness and resilience. Not only helping people find that for themselves, whatever season of life they're in, but also learning to coach themselves and also to coach others. So that's where the Coaching and Positive Psychology Institute was born, and we train personal executive coaches, which we've done for the last 10 years. What I hope people will take away from today is a very personal action plan, even if it's just one action that you take away that can help you to thrive in the midst of all that is going on. And thriving for you may look like having more calm and peace. It may look like having less anxiety, and it might mean finding joy in the midst of all of the challenges that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Valorie. Appreciate that. Louis, take us home.
My mission is to empower people, to empower other people to make life better. So I work in organizations and community context, inter-organizational kinds of dynamics to help change champions in those places become more effective at leading change and building capacity really to understand not just what they do, but why they do what they do work. So like Valorie said, the science behind the interventions that we help people learn on the ground in real time. And together, we're more powerful than any one of us alone, I believe. I'm so grateful to be here with colleagues, Sam and Paige, and I work together with the Leaders Lab and the Change Lab, and of course, my old friend Valorie. So what I hope people take away today is that they just remember something, perhaps that they already knew and perhaps forgot. And when that happens, I think when we wake up to something that we've forgotten, there's something really powerful there that can happen for ourselves, our own well-being, and then of course the people around us.
Beautiful. Thank you, Louis. And such beautiful missions and so such work that's aligned and needed in this present time. So let's jump into what we'll cover today. We'll look first at the #1 secret to leading a fulfilling life. I like the secret because it's not so much a secret. We'll tell you more about it. The second is, how do we cultivate anti-fragility during difficult times? Paige has a new book out on anti-fragility, so we'll talk about that. And Valorie will talk more about her new book out as well, which is around guilt and how to cultivate resilience. And then we'll look at best practices and strategies to bring more positive emotions into your daily life. That's what we'll talk about. Let's start with #1, around the #1 secret. And so for those of you who are familiar and those of you who are not, there's a 75-year study conducted at Harvard University, started in 1937 and actually finished in 2014. And the researchers followed over 600 participants and measured their emotional and physical and mental well-being over many, many decades. And what they found, and this is from one of the founders of the study, Dr. Robert Waldinger, is the following. The clearest message that we got from this 75-year study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier. It's the quality of our close relationships that matters most. And that's what they found above and beyond anything else that led to fulfillment, which led to health and longevity, was the close relationships that we cultivate in our life. And so what I'd love to do with all of you, and then we'll jump into the panel, is I want to take you through a very short experience and have you reflect for a moment, and this is to the audience, so all of you, on a moment over the last few years where you felt a peak experience, like a 10 out of 10 for you. You just felt alive and happy and fulfilled. And see if you can place one of those moments. I know it might seem tough in the reality of today, but see if you can find a moment like that over the last few years. I'm going to pause and give you a moment to find it. Maybe notice who you were with or what you were doing and how you were feeling. And if you feel called to it, you can write it on the chat. I'd love to see some of these peak experiences come in. And then on the other side, I'm going to ask you to reflect on a low point over the last few years. Maybe it's the last few weeks or few months. No judgment at all. Everything is allowed. But what is a moment where you found yourself kind of like at a 1 or 2 or 3 out of 10? Not really high on what you were doing or how you were living. See Toan writing in the chat, anytime I'm in nature with kids, elders. Brother-in-law suicide was a low moment. Thanks for being so open, Toan. Sorry to hear that. I'll give you a moment to reflect both on that high moment and that low moment in your life. And when I'm curious, I'm going to actually launch a poll here, is when you reflect on the peak experience, were other people a part of that experience? Just a simple yes or no. And then the same with the low point. Were other people a part of that low point? Just curious to see how your lived experience of that Harvard study sounds. Tanya says overworked, relationship strain, homeschooling. Yeah. Greg says happiest when I knew my kids would be okay. Thanks for sharing, Greg. And saddest during divorce. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I've seen the votes come in. I'll give you another 20 seconds or so. Ryan, a move across the country for a new role was a mistake. Yes. Sorry to hear that, Najila. Yeah, and I'll end the poll and share the results. It has to be expected in panelists as you look at those results. At 33, 100% other people were part of that experience. And then 82 to 18, the low point. And so what's the point we're making here? Well, relationships drive our highest highs and our lowest lows. And so the first question, and thank you all for sharing, that I'd love to focus on is here. And why don't we start with Louis? What does positive psychology teach us about cultivating strong and lasting relationships?
A lot. Positive psychology. Well, as you noted, that study, the Harvard adult men study, they call it, that looked at men throughout the lifespan and their families and their, the people around them, and showed that the happiest of those people, the healthiest of those people, were the ones that had strong relationships. So that means that relationships become one of the single best predictors of our lives, the quality of our lives. And so positive psychology is a field, a scientific field, that looks at quality of life and people's satisfaction and their well-being. And we want to understand what contributes to these lives that are well lived, that feel good and function effectively. And so there's lots of research that tries to address this question in different ways. So of course there's research on relationships, but there's also great research on having meaning and purpose, which is also about connecting, if you think, connecting to something larger than yourself, or making meaning, those examples of even happy times and not so happy times with other people around to help process what's happening. We create meaning. We also study things like engagement and what helps people not just show up to work, but show up to work and really be engaged with that, and also their lives, right? It's not just about work, but doing what we do best and feeling like we're not just accomplishing, which is important, but contributing. And strengths tell us something about that. What my strengths are different than what Valerie's strengths are. But together, our strengths create something even more magical than either one of us alone, like I said. So positive psychology is a research-based field that attempts to answer the question that philosophers and theologians for centuries have been asking, which is, what is the good life?
Beautiful, Louis. Thank you for sharing some of that high-level science. Curious, Paige, Valorie, anything to add on that before we talk a little bit about how to sustain those relationships and grow them during COVID?
I think we're both being polite.
It looks like Paige is about to talk, so I'm not going to talk. I'm gonna talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think Louis has done a wonderful job of kind of summarizing a huge field of research and growing more and more every day. And the central question is, what makes life worth living? And as those beautiful stories that have come in demonstrate to us, relationships are a huge part of what makes life worth living, and what can sometimes make it unbearable too. And whilst there are, as Louis has outlined, a number of other kind of very broad research areas that the science looks into, certainly relationships, as the Harvard study shows, is certainly central to our well-being. And that's a really important aspect to understand right now, because relationships are one of the things that we can have some semblance of control over, certainly how we show up in them. And when there's so much in our world, certainly at the moment, that is outside of our control, whether that's COVID related, or because you have bushfires in your area, or something's going on at work, relationships are one of those things that we can actually have some significant influence over and control how we show up in. So I think that that's a really positive thing, and a strong basis from which we can kind of grow our well-being during these really uncertain and disruptive times.
Valerie, anything to add on that?
I think all of what they just said is so important. I also think that in the middle of this pandemic and so many different things going on, that it has tested our relationships. I think about the lockdown. I think about parents like myself with 3 kids and trying to homeschool and trying to have a business at the same time. And those relationships, because if you happen to live with other people, that's your one-on-one connection, which we're not getting a lot of right now. So I think it takes additional management of the relationships, because the dynamics have changed so much. And it's easy not to notice. I mean, even though in most places we aren't locked down, so much has changed. If you were going into an office, there's a good chance you're not. If your kids were going to school, there's probably a 50-50 chance they're doing that now. And so I think right now, recognizing the importance of relationships that are immediately around you. And then if you are alone and spending more time than ever alone, being able to find those ways to connect is more important than ever. I think the technology is a really big tool. I know we knock technology a lot because it's addictive and sometimes it gets in the way of real connection. And yet I have found during this pandemic, the technology has been a new way to connect and even connect more than in the past, because we're more aware of how isolated we are. So I think we have some extra challenges right now, and in very practical ways, it's important for us to notice what has changed in our relationships so that we can still cultivate those relationships in meaningful ways, as opposed to saying, I can't be around anybody, saying, well, what can I do? And what do I need right now? I think are really important questions.
I love that. One of the things that I've reflected on during this time is not being around family or some friends that I haven't seen in a while. How do I maintain and even grow those relationships? And I've found that even via Zoom, I've had some of the more vulnerable conversations with folks in my life that I've had in a very, very long time. And I'd be curious to hear from the three of you, when you think, flipping it on its side, right? So many people are just in trying to maintain mode around relationships. I find how during COVID and the limitations, Valorie, or perhaps the opportunities that technology afford, how can we continue to grow relationships and strengthen them, as the Harvard study called our attention to?
Well, I think being very open, and that means sometimes being a bit vulnerable, in inviting others for conversation, asking for what you need, and also finding out what do others in your life need, and experimenting with it. Because I think sometimes when we come up with actions and goals, we're very quick to say, okay, it's going to be this, as opposed to, why don't I try X for a week or for a month and see how that works? I'll give you a simple example we did in our family. We have a family reunion every summer. And it's great. It's the descendants of my great-grandparents. And of course, we didn't have it this summer. And my mother at the last minute was like, let's have a Zoom call. It's like, okay, I don't know how this is going to go. But what happened was we had family members who never come from as far away as Australia. We had 2 cousins in Australia that we haven't seen in 30 years who showed up on Zoom, and others who showed up. And there was all this positive emotion, like, oh, look, it's so-and-so or so-and-so. So I found that, sometimes it's a matter of gathering people in new ways. And even, and especially those older relatives who might feel even more isolated. So our end was like, okay, well, since we can't do it in person, let's do this like every few months now. And of course, I'm on the hook for organizing all of that. But that's just one little example of using the technology and doing what you can, as opposed to focusing so much on what we can't do.
Yeah.
Paige Williams, jump in. Anything to add on that? How do you cultivate stronger relationships during COVID?
I think one of the interesting things has been, as you've demonstrated beautifully there, Valorie, is how now we're perhaps using technology for good and to connect rather than disconnect. And for so long we've had this story around technology is what's pulling us apart, and yet at these times, used in the right way, it's actually pulling us together. And as I speak with my clients, and whether that's one-on-one or even in work organizations, as kind of the water cooler conversation has, not been able to happen because we're not physically necessarily around a water cooler anymore. The amount of proactive checking in that's going on. So whilst there are some tools that have been kind of taken away because of circumstances, a lot of teams are actually saying, oh, I feel more cared for now because there's more intention. We're having to reach out in a more intentional and explicit way via technology, perhaps. And because of that, that's actually helping those relationships grow and feel strengthened. And they certainly need to, given what's being called of all of us right now. But it is interesting to see how, in many ways, the technology is being being used in a more healthy way to support connection and well-being now than it was before, which I think is interesting, where we can go to when we're challenged in the ways that we are right now.
So I'm going to take a different angle there, and I agree with both of what my colleagues have said here about the technology and seeing it as a blessing, really, for how we can perceive where we are in human history at this point. But the route I'm going to take is real-time connections. Our brains are wired for connection. I think we've said around that so far, but we are neurobiologically wired to evolve in groups. We need each other, in other words. And our brains don't really know the difference between a strong tie and a weak tie. And so when you're walking down the street with your dog, like I do a lot, I try to be mindful to connect with strangers, weak ties, people I don't know. And you'll see it gives you a little jolt of joy in that moment if you are open. Maybe it takes a little bit of vulnerability. And, in the grocery, I think we have an additional challenge with the mask in connecting with people. But that's why our eyes and our, smizing, I think it's called, right? Smiling with your eyes, and just finding micro moments, we call them, of connection opportunities, where I feel like a lot of that's missed. A lot of people kind of walk through the grocery, take note next time you're there, kind of in their lane, so to speak, in their phone, or just, not capitalizing on those micro moments of connections. So, smiling with your eyes, saying hello, using someone's name when you see it on a tag, all of these things are small things that can have big impacts in your well-being, and guess what, for the people that you're connecting with too. So in many ways, we really need to step up at this time as social emotional leaders to be the ones to take the smart risk, to say hello, to be engaged, to connect in real time. And you'll see that those things add up. There's an aggregate of those 1% gains over time. And it gets easier. And it's not like you always will do it, but see if you could be more mindful to capitalize on those small moments.
Weapon to being in the grocery and having folks who want to actually speak to him, right? Having a cute puppy next to you helps. I wonder if that's a great transition to Valorie, some of the work that you do around resiliency, right? That these micro moments that we take to cultivate relationships, well, they take work and they take resiliency and going after it over and over again. And so let me just put up the next question I'd love to focus on, which is, what tools can we use to navigate difficult times and build our resilience? And that being so key to our well-being over time. And Valorie, would love if you started us off there.
Well, I think first of all, right now, being aware of the way in which the situation that we're in requires more mental and emotional energy than we needed just a year ago or 8 months ago to operate in the world. And this is really something that applies to everyone. So I think a level of self-compassion is extremely important. Being kind to yourself, noticing, hey, I might need a little more rest than I used to. I might need more connection and conversation because I'm processing things, or I'm feeling alone, or I'm feeling anxious because I'm just uncertain, as we all are, about what's coming next. There is so much going on, and all of it is requiring resilience. The fact that we're all sitting here right now and we're focused enough to be able to do this is a sign of resilience. Being able to reach out and say, what tools could I gain? What do I need? What new knowledge might help me? So I would like to say that because it's easy for us to say, I need to be more resilient, without noticing how resilient we already are. So most important is becoming aware of what's going on in your mind. resilience largely, not completely, but largely is about our thoughts. There are basically three things that empower our resilience. One of them we don't control, which is our genetics, right? We can have some underlying genetic factors that cause us to be less resilient, but we don't know until we're going through something and those things start bubbling up. We can't do anything about those. What we can do something about is our resources and our thoughts. Resources is everything from your experience, your background, money you may have at your disposal, relationships, people that can help you, all of those things, which it's important to be able to, in times of really needing it, being able to say, what resources can I call on? Who can I call on? Who's been here and done that might have great advice for me, or a connection? So many people in this pandemic have lost their jobs. I mean, this is, I don't know what the numbers are right now, but we're in the tens of millions who at the beginning of the year weren't even anticipating that they would be having trouble with work. My husband is a pilot. He was laid off. And so, just a few months ago, that just wasn't a thought at all. So, looking at those resources and relationships can be a big piece of it. But the thing we can change immediately is our thinking. And resilient people in the face of both opportunities and challenges think differently. So what I would ask you to do is, one, make a list of the things that are stressing you most. What are the stressors? What are the things that tend to trigger reactions and actions that you're finding to be counterproductive? Like either you're getting stuck, or you're procrastinating, or you are just not moving forward, or you're finding yourself angry and irritated all the time. Being able to just notice what those reactions are, especially when they're different from your normal reactions, is really important. And then the awareness comes in saying, what am I saying to myself about the circumstance? Because our thoughts create those reactions, meaning, what you feel, what you say, what you do. And this process can take some practice. I know when I was going through a divorce more than a decade ago, the thoughts that were coming to me were just insane. Like, my life is over. I don't know if am I ever going to, find love again? Will I get to be a mom? Will I have to quit what I do? Because obviously my life isn't perfect. How am I going to tell other people how to live better lives? I mean, these were the thoughts, and you can imagine the emotions and the actions those led to. But little by little, taking each one of those thoughts that are untruthful and counterproductive and being able to say, what could I change this to that leads me to where I want to be? And this is so simple, but I literally wrote a list of the crazy stuff I was saying to myself that was not helping. And I wrote a replacement list. And it wasn't that those thoughts became automatic, but over time, I began catching myself saying things that were counterproductive and replacing it, even when I didn't feel like it. And so my question to everyone is, right in the middle of this pandemic, what are you saying about your circumstances that's creating more anxiety, right? Are you saying this is never going to get better? We're going to stay in a pandemic for the next decade. I'm never going to get a job again, or my spouse is never going to get a job again. The things that aren't very helpful. And so being very intentional, not just about, this isn't just thinking positively, but it really is being accurate and finding the thoughts that help you. So even if it's, maybe life's not going to turn out exactly the way I want it, but I'm not giving up on my vision. That was my thought to myself. I'm going to keep it in front of me, and I'm willing to risk the disappointment if my hope doesn't materialize into my reality. So those are my initial thoughts on resilience, because so much of resilience really is your thinking. Not all of it, but a great deal of it.
Thanks, Valorie. So many nuggets there. One of the things you talk about really is choice, that you always have choice within those thoughts, which ones you focus on, or choice within how you deal with those emotions. And Louis, that's something that we've spoken about, this concept of choice and how important that is in this conversation about resiliency. Any thoughts to add there?
Yeah, I love what you said, Val, about thinking about how you think, really. And worry is such a misuse of our imagination, y'all. It is it wants to creep in, and it might have an advantage at times when it can help us focus on what needs attention, right? That stress we feel in our bodies is just an opportunity for us to tap into something that's important to us. And one little way that I like to think about resilience is learning how to navigate and really struggle well, right? So it doesn't take away the struggle, like Val was explaining so nicely. It just helps you learn some tools and techniques to work through the struggle. They say you have to go through it to get through it. And so learning some of these techniques, these tricks, and I'm going to share one with you now that really gets at this idea of choice. And that is that in every moment of every day, and there are 20,000 moments in every given day, we measure it by the number of breath cycles that we take. But in each of those moments, we have a choice to perceive what's about to happen in front of us before it actually happens. It's actually the future that we have a perception of before we actually get there. And in that split second moment to moment, we choose to perceive either an opportunity in this next moment or a threat. And the reality is we've evolved evolutionarily to spot more threats than we do opportunities. Our brains want to help us navigate a treacherous world. And so at this inflection point in human history where, chaos and disruption and change is really the name of the game, like Val said, what a great opportunity to perceive an opportunity in this particular moment. Who do I want to be? How do I want to show up to this circumstance? What would an optimal future look like, even if I can only see the next week or the next hour or the next minute? And trying to work with our brains and connecting them to our hearts in order to start learning that we have a choice in how we want to look at this. It doesn't take away the struggle. Resilience helps us learn how to struggle well.
I love that last line, Louis. Thank you for that. Paige, you just wrote a book, Becoming Antifragile. Thought deeply about this topic. I know that there are key distinctions between resiliency and antifragility, but tell us a little bit more about what antifragility is and why it's so important to cultivate.
Sure, love to, Sam. So antifragile comes from the work of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who's written about it in the kind of economic and political terms. And in essence, it means how can, in those terms, a system have more upside than downside through disruption and uncertainty. So you can imagine that it kind of in economic markets, how is it that some organizations thrive as the economic, I'm sure they might be thriving now if they're anti-fragile. There's lots of disruption going on in economic terms. And how is it that others are more fragile in those contexts? And I came across the word in the middle of last year and I was like, wow, what does that mean for us as humans? What does that mean for a system of one, a person, an individual to be anti-fragile? What could it look like for leaders to lead teams in that way, to lead organizations in that way? So the essence of anti-fragile is actually coming through the struggle with, in some way, I just use the term, in some way better. Now, what does better look like? Well, that's going to look different for different people at different times and in different contexts. And it's interesting because I think what it brings together is what Val and Louis have just been talking about, which is one, understanding how sometimes we are our biggest saboteurs in what we're thinking and how we're talking to ourselves, or the internal radio. And secondly, then understanding, so what can I learn from that and learn forward? And this is the better bit. Because if we are learning is something that it's so portable, it's transportable. And one of the things that I'm finding as I speak to people now is that we're, 8-9 months into our COVID experience. So how is it that we can reflect and see what is the learning that we can take from the experience, the thriving, the struggle, because often they go hand in hand. Perhaps thinking back about where have I been most proud? Even as maybe I've struggled through this, where have I been proud in the way that I've shown up? And what can I learn from that in terms of how I can be more of that going forward. So really inherent in Antifragile is this idea of not just bouncing back, and we sometimes use the metaphor of that around resilience, but actually going beyond that to learn forward, so that in some way we're coming through what we acknowledge as a struggle experience, and we're learning forward from that. Because the way I'd sometimes talk about it is, how is it we can shrink the time frame in which we're able to do that, so that it isn't a case of I struggle, then there's a gap, and I'm then able to look back and see what was the learning. This is almost like, we sometimes use the term real-time resilience in terms of being able in the moment to kind of deal with what's going on. And this takes that, if you like, a little bit beyond that. And it's like, how can I, as I'm experiencing that in real time, be thinking, what's the learning for me in this? How do I take that learning and move it forward so that I'm getting the upside from my struggle in this in real time? So it's about reflective learning. So tuning in, as Val said, to understanding what's the dialogue I'm telling myself is a really important first step in that. Because if we're not aware, if we're not conscious and mindful of what it is that we're telling ourselves, we can't tune in enough to be able to see how we might need to adjust that dial, and what we can learn about not going back to that particular station again, so that we can find a more constructive way to deal with it going forward. So it's this real learning piece is one of the critical aspects, so that we can learn forward and be better from our experiences, rather than becoming fragile by staying in these unhelpful patterns.
Beautiful. Thank you, Paige. And I guess just following up on that, and this is for all three of you, I often find I'll talk to coaches or others who will talk a lot about the reframe. Right? You got to be able to reframe this experience. What's the positive in this? Which is part of what I hear beneath how both of you are talking, both about anti-fragility in some senses, and also resiliency. I know there's some of the distinctions. I'm curious, because that's deep work, and often I find that it just gets passed over as just another statement. I'm curious to hear from the three of you, what does that really look like in practice? How can you be successful in that reframe, especially when it comes to really difficult experiences? What have been some of your own insights on that journey?
Well, I think first we have to recognize the importance and legitimacy of our negative emotions, to not ignore those and to allow ourselves to process them. Because it can be very easy to misunderstand how important positive emotions are, because they are. Negative is more powerful than positive, so we need more positive to undo the effects of the negative. But when we're dealing with so much negative, it can feel like I have to push this aside. And so there's more work to do, right? If there's more negative, then there's a whole lot more positive that you need to undo it. So there's a whole lot more work going on. I always like to say that positive emotion is a success strategy, that we know from the research that those who have more positive emotion have many more successful outcomes, are more likely to get raises, to get promoted, to be in very successful marriages, to be less likely to become ill, to live longer. I mean, there's all of these wonderful benefits of positive emotion. But I think the first step is noticing when you feel the negative, acknowledging it, and not being afraid of it, because that's where you begin in a place of truth. And if I go back to the beginning of this pandemic, well, we don't know exactly when the beginning was, but the beginning where I felt I knew, we're in trouble, right? It's like mid-March. You know, I have 2 bonus daughters and a son, and all of a sudden they go to school one day, and at 7 p.m. that night, it's like, oh, no school for 2 weeks. We knew it would be much longer. And that ended up being 5 months, you know, by the time we got done with summer. We had a coach training event coming up. People had already, you know, signed up for it, paid for their tickets. It's like, do we cancel it? What do we do? All these crazy thoughts coming to me. I keep saying crazy. I should say something else. All these negative thoughts coming to me. And I remember just wanting to go get in the bed and put the covers over my head and not make any decisions, because I felt like all my speaking engagements are getting canceled. if I try to take my coach training event online, I had this thought in my head, all these people are going to be angry and they're all going to cancel. And so we're going to be refunding all of this money and we don't know when this pandemic is over. So I don't know, maybe I should just go sit down somewhere and forget about what I'm doing. Like this, I'm the coach, right? I teach resilience, but these were my honest thoughts. And so I processed all those thoughts, and at the bottom of it was, okay, so now what? I can spiral through all of my catastrophizing, and at some point I had to decide what I was going to do. And what I was going to do was deal with working from home and homeschooling kids and decide to take the event online and accept that the speaking engagements might get rescheduled, might not, whatever is going to happen is what's going to happen. I had to decide to just accept what is. And sometimes one of the ways we reframe is getting honest about the things we are most afraid of. What am I afraid is about to happen that's getting me stuck? Okay, so what if that happens? For me, this always leads to a more resilient response because I'm forced to go onto the other side of my fear and picture myself there and decide who I want to be. And in the process of doing that, what ended up happening is our family was more connected than ever because we were all at home. And we started having fun games in the evening and making themes out of our dinners and watching the sunsets. And nobody got angry at me about taking the event online. In fact, more people registered and thanked me because now I don't have to fly to Atlanta. I can participate from Saudi Arabia and Kenya and Australia and England. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it, right? And so my whole point here, oh, and then the speaking engagements, they dropped off, and then all of a sudden around July, everybody's like, well, I guess we're in a pandemic. Can you speak to us virtually? So at the end of the day, sometimes being really truthful about what you're afraid of, and literally close your eyes and imagine that whatever that fear is comes true, and imagine that you can handle it, and picture yourself handling it, and decide what your plan B or even your plan C is, and just say, it is what it is. Now what? I don't know if that's the reframing you're asking for, but from a resilience standpoint, facing our fears and telling the truth about those fears, and then saying, okay, now what, can be really, really powerful.
Valorie. Louis, Paige, anything to add on that feels resonant? So much.
I would just say, that the struggle is real. To Val's point about getting in touch with the truth, it's a quite valuable technique. And then in that space, it's just to acknowledge that it's hard, right? And I think we don't like to sit in discomfort too long as human beings. We'd like to sometimes cope with some unhealthy behaviors that might help us check out. Like Val said, I want to put the covers over my head, or numb out. I want to drink too much or whatever, too much to numb the pain. But I love the reminder that when you numb the negative stuff, you're also numbing your capacity for the positive stuff. And you can't separate the two. When you're trying to check out of what's difficult, you also check out of the opportunity to do the things that Val and Paige are talking about seeing the future, about imagining yourself handling it. In fact, if you think through, life to this point, you have struggled well. You have learned how to navigate challenges and change. And in fact, everything is always changing. And in fact, challenges are always springing up. And human beings are naturally adaptive to change. We may not think it that way, but we are. We get used to it. Whatever it is, we get used to it. The good stuff and the not so good stuff. And just allowing it to be, I think, before jumping to reframing to the positive is such an important reminder. It's just to sit in the discomfort and acknowledge that this is hard. And I love how Glennon Doyle says, we can do hard things. We know how to do hard things, and we're not alone. right? That's why relationships are so important. And the research shows that people who reach out in times that are tough really show signs of growth as a mindset, right? Because it's saying, hey, look, I don't know what to do next. Or, hey, look, help me. And as we show up as friends to those conversations, put away the idea that you need to be the solution finder, the problem solver for that particular challenge. Just holding space for someone and saying, yeah, wow, that really sucks. Like someone said, that their boss is leaving, and the dynamics at work are changing. And yeah, that's hard. It's change can be hard, but it doesn't always help to think of it that way. It doesn't help for you to kind of show up to that challenge thinking this is going to be more difficult than it is right now. So sit in the difficulty, sit in the discomfort. And I know for me, something that's really helped me over the past few months, Sam, has been not waiting for things to be different in order for me to be happy in my life and to be well in my life. And one simple thing that I did, I think in June, actually, or July, I got back from an RV road trip with my twin sister and her family. And I remember coming home thinking, wow, like I can't wait for the gym to open back up again if I'm going to get my workouts in the way that I know my mind needs my body to support it. And so, I got online and I found used weights and a bench, and, I just set myself up at home. I found myself thinking I was waiting for something to be different in order for me to be well right now. And I just challenge everybody to remember, don't wait to drink your good champagne. Now is always a good time to do it.
I love that. Thank you, Louis. And such a beautiful message. And maybe, Paige, you can take us there to being well and the champagne of wellness. And a lot of positive psychology focuses on positive emotion and what those are and how important they are to our well-being. So perhaps you could tell us, why are positive emotions so important to this conversation around well-being?
Well, as Valorie highlighted, negative emotions are certainly the way our brains are wired. And as Louis has spoken to as well, our brains are wired to keep us safe. That's kind of the organizing principle. And that really serves us in the short term. So if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, we needed to have those negative emotions really strong so that if we were in a threatening situation, we knew that we were and we could manage it accordingly. But what the research suggests is that positive emotions play just as an important role in our lives, but perhaps with more long-term gain. So if the negative emotions are about us surviving, then the positive emotions are really about us thriving in the long term. Because what positive emotions do is they give us resources. So whether that is positive emotions that are through connection because we're building relationships. And as we've already covered, we're hardwired for connection. But also when you think about it, we're much more, we're more effective, we problem solve better in groups. We also problem solve and we're more creative when we're in positive emotional states, and they help us actually reach out, not just in terms of connecting with each other, but in terms of being able to see solutions and move forward in a more effective and constructive way. So as well as them feeling good, like it's nice to experience positive emotions, they actually help us do well as well. So feel well and do well. So these positive, us actually experiencing a full range of them. And this is the when I kind of unpack positive emotions with people, whether it's one-to-one or in groups. What's interesting is when we say to people, what do you think of when you think of positive emotions? And I'll be interested for people to type in the chat, when you think of, hey, what's a positive emotion? What are the words that spring to mind? And often we'll hear things like happiness and joy, but equally it's appreciating that there's a whole buffet of positive emotions that maybe if we're not really acknowledging them as positive emotions, then they're not having the same impact with us. So whether it's just that gentle sense of contentment as you're kind of maybe sitting on the back porch or going for a walk in nature, or maybe if you're out in nature, it's the awe and wonder at seeing something that's beautiful in your environment. Or whether it's being proud, maybe you are proud of the way your family have pulled together, or a project that your children have done through online schooling, which we know for many isn't as easy. So there are these full of range of emotions where if we actually kind of acknowledge them and let them sit with us and feel the impact of them, be mindful and conscious of how we are experiencing them, then we can broaden the impact that they have in our lives and build the emotional energy, which we've already touched on, is something that, you know, we're needing to draw more on right now. So, you know, one of the things that I've taken to doing is I go out for a walk each morning just to kind of connect in with the day and get out there into the day. And as I do that, I take no technology with me so that I can really be present in my body, in my breathing, and really notice, you know, what's going on in the world. I don't live in a country area, you know, what's going on, who's around me, what's going on in nature, so that I'm really connecting in with how I'm feeling, as well as the actual experience. And that might just be a sense of contentment that I'm out, I've got some time on my own because I quite like some time on my own, and I'm out in the fresh air and whatever the weather is doing that day. So the idea that positive emotions serve us in the long term, negative emotions are super important and useful for us in terms of information, but actively noticing what are the positive emotional experiences we're having, particularly right now, where we need to fill up our energy bucket, our emotional energy bucket, is a really powerful and useful tool for us to use every day.
Thanks, Paige, and appreciate you calling out just a very simple practice, taking a walk and doing some reflecting. That seems that you do every day. I'd be curious here from Louis and Valorie also, what is a particular wellness practice or well-being practice that you have leveraged during COVID to stay sane, to feel well, to feel healthy? What's the specific practice that you'd like to offer to our community? And as our panelists tell us about that, we'd love to hear from all of you who are on. What is one practice that you have found to be most effective at enhancing your well-being during COVID? But yeah, Valorie, Louis, what do you think? Stare off.
Stare each other down.
I can go if you'd like. You have something right there to say about. I could tell it's not that you're trying to find something. I don't think.
I thought maybe I was talking too much, so I want you to go first.
Thank you. I will. Creativity, Sam. You know, I have taken out my paints and have left them out on my dining table. I have a really long dining table, and I have a friend who said, "Wow, Louis, you use every ounce of this house." And especially during COVID, I think that that's especially true, right? So I set up a little art space. I bought some canvases. I keep my paints out, and it's been so cathartic for my well-being that it's not just something that I get around to. It's something that I've just incorporated into my life, you know, even if I go and do a stroke on that canvas, and then just trusting that that art is something that is a process, right? It's a great opportunity, Val, I think, to challenge our minds in that moment, right? Of, you know, that's not good enough, or I can't, or you should have done it this way. And it's also a great mindfulness exercise because artists on a canvas don't know how it's going to turn out when it starts. You have to constantly be adaptive to what's happening. You know, you put this here and then you try this there, and then you because of that, you do this. And so it just really requires you to be present, requires you to be mindful. And, you know, we don't always just have to sit on a cushion, although you should, to meditate, to practice mindfulness. You know, this is a great opportunity to just incorporate it into your life, whether you're at that canvas or even washing the dishes. It's a great opportunity to just be there now and stop the ticker tape that's wanting to tell you what you should do next or what you should have done before you got there, and just pause. Val, you're up.
So I think all of us have to just say, what brings me joy? In what way could I play? And when I say play, there's the play that you perform for, but one of the ways we get more rest is to use the other side of our brains, to do something that engages us, but is not just because we have to be good at it or we have to perform. This helps us to relax. This helps us to then go back to the things we need to perform well on and do better at them. So in other words, not just the stuff that's, oh, I'm tired, I'm going to sit in front of the TV and binge watch a show. But as Louis was just saying, what can I do that would really engage me? So there have been a couple things for me. I've always prayed and meditated. I won't say always, but most part of my adult life, that's really helped me to connect. And so I have continued to do that. And I see the difference on days when I rush into my work day without stopping because I'm like, I didn't get up early enough. And I think that is so very important, not only because it slows you down and what it does for your mind in terms of mindfulness, but that's where I get my best ideas. That's where when the problem or the stressful thing I'm working on and trying to figure out, all of a sudden, with no effort at all, the right idea comes. Also, living on the property that we live on, which we moved here about 2.5 years ago, you know, when I was going into the office and so forth, I wasn't really walking around our property so much. But being at home, I take a lot of my meetings or even coaching sessions when it's at a good point. I'm on my phone, but I'm walking. And my husband actually created a little hiking trail behind the house. We have a tractor, we have horses. I know it's a little different, but what I realized is we had this available to us, and yet we weren't using it. And so we've been more intentional. I mean, he just today took the riding lawnmower. It's like, okay, I made the path again, right? Because the weeds and the grass grow up. So I'm wondering, like, what do you already have at your disposal that you've ignored and taken for granted? And the other way I've practiced mindfulness more, and I'm getting better at it, is with my 6-year-old. Because, you know, some of us are natural at play, and others of us, that would be me.
Yeah.
It's not, it doesn't come as naturally. Like my husband, it's his number one strength, humor and playfulness. I married what I wanted for myself. Maybe that strength can rub off on me. And so when I have felt tempted, I mean, just being honest as a parent, sometimes your kids want to do stuff that you have no interest whatsoever in, right? You can become distracted easily. I've used this as an opportunity to just breathe and say, no, just focus right here with him. No, you don't really care about Lego ninjas, but let's listen to what Lego ninjas are up to. That's a form of mindfulness that also takes me away from the other stuff that I'm doing, and it helps me connect with my son. And for me, I mean, there's what's more important than connecting with the people that you love, and he's not going to be this age forever. So that form of mindfulness and the opportunity to slow down because we're not going out so much has been, I think, really helpful. And it's something that makes me feel good because it lines up with the values I want to live by, but sometimes don't.
Love that. And beneath what I really hear there, Valorie, is that we should all go buy some Lego ninjas and get to work.
Yeah, very therapeutic.
Well, I'd love to, yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
how would you
Louis.
answer that question? I know that well-being is top of mind for you in your life. So I'm just curious how you would answer that.
Yeah. I think I have practices that open my mornings. I have a morning practice, and I also have an evening practice. And I find that my evening practice is more and more useful because I'm on Zoom all day for the most part. And how do I actually shut down and close my day? It used to be the drive home, right, or a walk outside the office. But how do I do that in an intentional way? So I've set up, a sacred space, and I'll journal, and it brings into flow the rest of my evening. I find that presence that I can bring, a word that you use, Louis, is incredibly helpful for me during the chaos that is all around us. So thank you for asking, sir.
Can I just comment real fast? Because I think it's so important. What you're saying is mindful transitions.
Yes.
And I heard something last week that asked, are you working from home or are you working from home, or is your home at your work? Right? Like, I don't know that so many people have transitions between work and life because work is now at home, part of life. And I have a colleague Margaret Greenberg, who taught me this years ago, Val, you might remember that when she's done with work at the end of her day, she has this bouquet of flowers near her computer. She takes them and she puts them away so that it primes her mind to turn that off. Work is now done. And now I'm going to go into this next segment of my day and be able to show up to the ninjas or whatever's there on the next segment. But I think full transition, especially in this era where everything is all together in this mishmash of work and home. And just like you're saying, Sam, I love that. It's a great strategy to just have a little tradition, a little ritual to help support that mindful transition.
Thanks, Louis. I'm mindful that we only have about 20 minutes left and want to make sure that our lovely audience gets an opportunity to ask some of our panelists their questions. So would love if you put your questions in the chat, and we'll start off. I see one from Toan. Thanks for putting this in, who asked, what is the hardest unexpected challenge you've faced during COVID, and how did you get through it, and what are some of your learnings? And hashtag ninja tips, please. I like that. So any thoughts on that? What's an unexpected challenge? How to get through it? What are some learnings?
So I think one of the things I found toughest is actually the homeschooling piece, which I'm sure resonates with so many people, but I'm naturally, I'm fairly introverted. So the time where the girls were at school, I have 2 teenagers, and was kind of my sanctuary time, particularly because I do my work from home as well, and always have. So I haven't had to do that transition, which is, in some ways easier. But now it feels like they're kind of invaders in my space. They're space invaders, and mentally as well, right? So whereas I'm used to having a house that's quiet, or if there's music on, it's the music I want on, and it's certainly not animes on the TV in the front room, and we're quite open plan. And I was doing a podcast recording the other day, and my youngest daughter came down with her AirPods in and started making toast. And because she had her AirPods in, she couldn't hear quite how loud she was being. And I was on a recording, so I couldn't say, hey, Pixie, can you turn it down? So I was like, whew. So Valorie, everything you were telling me about what was you were talking about earlier, what was going on in my head? Well, that was not for public consumption, what was going on in my head, let me tell you. So what I found I have to do is, when I can see that I'm reaching those points where there's that little emoji where your brains are blowing out of your head, that's me sometimes. I have to actually physically remove myself and go for that walk around the block. So it's not just one I do a day, Sam. In fact, you might say you can tell how well or badly the day's going by how many walks around the block I have to do. And just to create, I have to actually create that space for myself. And the girls might come down and I'll say, I'm going out for a walk, and it might be, can I come? And I'm like, nah, sorry, love you dearly, but this is about me creating some space. And so it is, we've talked a lot about being compassionate. So, am I beating myself up saying I'm a bad mum? Maybe sometimes, but mostly I'm just going, do you know what? This is going to make me a better mum for when I'm back in the house in 10 minutes. And it's going to make me better to show up for them and to show up for myself and be in service of my clients as I'm doing work with them if I create this space. So this idea around compassion and tuning into where you are. And then what I loved about when we were talking earlier, the reframing piece is, you don't have to reframe to positive, but how can we reframe to constructive? And that for me is the piece in this, is I don't have to feel great about the fact that I want to pull my hair out around being around my kids, but that's the reality of it. So what's the constructive action I can move to in that moment? And removing myself and taking a walk is what I do. So that's been the unexpected challenge, and that's been the way I get through it.
I love that, Paige. And you remind me of one of my, this is from a comic, but I love this phrase, I'll take care of me for you if you take care of you for me. It's an interesting play, right? And that is a lot to do with those walks and taking that time for yourself, even in a chaotic day. Thanks for sharing. Louis, Valorie, anything to add on a challenging time and lessons that you've learned as you've navigated?
I've found that The biggest challenge of COVID is that we are not just dealing with COVID. At first, it felt like we were just dealing with COVID, and at least here in the US, when that became followed up with all of the protests after Ahmaud Arbery and especially then George Floyd, all of the political back and forth, the division, making COVID a political thing, like not being able to have conversations that I thought would be basic conversations about things like, and then now, like, as we were talking when we first started, the fires, there's just so much. There's probably some stuff I'm leaving out even as I talk. So I had started in late 2016, I had started the practice of not watching the news. I read my news and I deliberately choose the apps that I have to be as neutral as possible. I just want to read the facts and come to my own conclusions. And I have found that to be even more important now than ever because there's even more coming at us. So I think for me, it was, okay, I feel like I'm getting my arms around this, what's changed with COVID. And then it's just one thing after another, and they're not small things. We're in the midst of so much change, and it makes me wonder on the other side who we're going to be. But I do believe, as I always ask, what's the opportunity and the challenge? And I really believe that when we go through really difficult things, we have to make a decision. I will be better and not bitter. And my hope is, as a world, we can do that. And so I think each of us has to ask that question. But one of my biggest tips has been intentionally just not staying glued to the television. I hardly turn it on, especially when it's coming to news. Because what you're doing is allowing other people, and a lot of times with the news, it's so sensational. We're trying to get an emotional rise out of people so they'll keep watching so we can sell more ads. And I just don't want to get sucked into that. So I think it's important to be informed, but take note of how that news impacts you. And particularly when you start talking about the murders and so forth. Like I can't watch this stuff over and over again. It's important to know what's going on, but then decide for you, how do I want to show up? How do I want to make a difference? And not just get sucked into the sensationalism of the news, which can amplify the emotions that you have.
Mm. Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Louis.
Is it inciting or is it informing? You know, and when we're aware of that, I love that, because Val, one of the things that I did during quarantine is I unfollowed both of my parents on Facebook. It was actually necessary, you know, because I was being sucked into you know, that different political point of view that I always felt that I needed to help
engage.
Yeah, like that I needed to engage. So it was like one of the best things I did, Sam, over COVID was just kind of make some more decisions about where I'm going to put boundaries. And that wasn't the hardest thing I did during COVID. Actually, I would say the hardest thing was going through a breakup. And that came to me because there was an awareness that some of my needs were not being met. And some of my values were not being lived in this particular relationship. And as hard as it is to go through a breakup and a trend like that, for me to do that, go through that process I need, and basic simple things that help us live our lives well is something that we're not always taught in schools, which is very interesting, but something so crucially essential to a well-lived life is an awareness of, hey, what do I value? Am I aligned with these values and how I'm showing up to my life? And what do I need?
I love that, Louis, and pulling on so much of what we've talked about around positive emotion, but also around relationships and how it's so important to be in relationships that feel aligned to the value level and how that can bring you up in terms of the life that you lead and how fulfilled you are. So thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing with us. I want to make sure that we get to our last question here for the three of you. And if we have time, we can do one more Q&A. But I want to ask the three of you as we come towards the last 10 minutes together, what's one thing you'd like leaders who are on this call to remember from our time together today? If you had to, what would it be? What's the takeaway for all of you?
Hang out with Val and Paige more often.
There you go.
This is fun. I would say to remember that leadership is contagious, that the people you lead, whether that is in a work environment, whether that is in your family or your community, they're looking to your response. And the more authentic you can be, and when I say authentic, I mean not pretending that everything is easy when you're going through difficulties, but also being mindful of the impact of your reactions on them, because it's contagious. As Liz was talking about, just saying this is hard. I know there's some research around self-compassion and just telling yourself, what I'm going through right now is hard. Well, you know what, as a leader, when you say that, yeah, this is hard. Things are not what they were a year ago. But we can figure out how to get through this. This is our opportunity to dig in. This is our opportunity to find our strength, to use our strengths, to pull us forward. And you know what? Let's figure out how we can be better on the other side of this. Just knowing that what you say and what you do matters, and as a leader, it carries more weight. You have to be cognizant of that. And sometimes as a leader, when you're in the middle of it, that might mean you don't speak immediately about from your place of emotion, but that you do the things we're talking about, mindfully going back. There might be some meditation. There might be the people you privately are able to talk to and process, so that whatever your responses are responses that lift everyone. And that's a big responsibility. But I just want to remind those of you who are leading that you can do that, you can do it, but it does take a bit more intention. Sometimes you're going to have to say to yourself, whew, this is hard. I can do it, but this is hard. What do I need in order to lead well, in order to be resilient and to show my people what it looks like to be resilient? I think one of the most important ways we can do that for those who are parents is to do this with your kids. Your kids are saying, this is too hard. I don't want to be at home. I don't want to see my friends. And being able to say, I know it's hard, but this is what it is now. How do you want to show up? What do you need? How can I help? Kind of normalizing that, yeah, this is hard, yet you need to find your way through. And you can.
Thank you, Valorie. Yeah, beautifully put. Paige, Louis, what about you? What's one thing you want leaders to leave with today?
I think that it's this idea that we don't, as Valerie's spoken to so beautifully, it's not easy, and not having all the answers. So a lot of the work I'm doing is encouraging people to take off this kind of superhero cape, particularly right here, right now. One person never had all the answers. That was just a story we told ourselves about leadership anyway. But certainly at times like this, acknowledging that let's find our way through this together, and taking that pressure off of yourself to think that we have to have all the answers. And what's interesting is the research that we've just done out of the Change Lab, where Louis and I work together in the Leaders Lab, is that one of the things that is helping leaders most is understanding how they can move between this. At times, we need to be kind of this command and control. People want direction around how are we going to do this? What's happening next? What is this next thing that's being thrown at us mean in terms of the way that we're working? But then at other times, it's very much about letting that go, excuse me, and co-creating what constructive looks like. What's the action we need to move to here? So as Valorie acknowledged, it takes a lot more energy and mindfulness and thinking about what's of service here? How can I be of service to these people or this situation, rather than necessarily going, what am I doing, putting myself at the front here? And, you know, that takes being in the moment and understanding where you are at, in order to understand whether that's the helpful or less helpful space to be operating from right now. So permission not to be perfect, permission not to have all the answers, and agility in terms of moving between when people really need direction to feel safe, and then creating space for co-creation when there's possibility to do that.
Mm. I would just add, well, very well said to that, you know, agility and capacity, you know, and learning, having a learning orientation and upskilling yourself and the team around how to show up for each other as compassionate coaches in this time of disruption. It really is a set of skills and tools and strategies. You know, Val has a coaching institute for a reason, because it is such an important set of tools to have in your belt. And we do a lot of work at the Change Lab in teaching people some of the systems dynamics that are important for understanding how change works. And of course, Hone does so much to help upskill coaches and managers as coaches, and how you can develop this skill set. So I would say, just for leaders to remember that they don't have to show up to the job having it all figured out. In fact, having the awareness and the vulnerability to say, you know what, I don't know, you know, and we've never done this before. None of us. This is a very novel situation for all of us living in the year 2020. And so you're not expected to know it all. You're not expected to have it all figured out. In fact, it goes a long way to even send a correspondence to your team saying, you know what, guys, we're still figuring this piece of it out. And what that does to just down-regulate the stress that people are feeling and the uncertainty. So anything that can, you know, happen I like to think about leadership as the space in between people. It's not a function where someone sits, it's in between people. And so just showing up as a human being, as a person, can go a long way to say, yeah, you know, we're all in this together.
Thanks, Louis. And one of the themes I hear through all three of your answers is this concept of humanness and authenticity and being real during a very difficult time. And it reminds me of some of the research out of Google around the importance of psychological safety, and this mirroring from the leader of, it's okay to fail, it's okay to be yourself, and you are accepted, and just how incredibly important that is for our well-being and also for our organizational efficacy. So thank you all so much. This has been such a fun conversation. I've enjoyed it so much. And before we go, would love to hear from others. If you put in the chat, what is your one commitment for this week? You heard from our panelists just around key takeaways. Well, what is a commitment that you have around your own well-being, around enhancing it, around helping those around you? What is a commitment? Put that in the chat so that we can celebrate you. I see Nancy write in, be kinder to myself. I love that. Find a way to play. I love that. Be more gentle on myself so that I can hold space for others. Beautiful. Ryan, a practice to close the day. Aaliyah, reflection and journaling, walking and painting, taking a number of those practices. That's beautiful. Thank you. Taking my next walk without tech. Love it, Louis. Deborah, spending more time with the ones I love, being kinder to others too. Beautiful, Nancy. And as you write those in, I just want to remind you that we're offering free enrollment, 15 plus courses. Come hang out with Louis, learn more about the coaching mindset and approach, or how to build a thriving team culture and build on some of the concepts from today. Or embracing diversity with inclusion, part of our diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging curriculum, and also adding a number of other courses on mindfulness, energy management, and yes, parenting during COVID-19, to make sure that we can support all of you during this difficult, but perhaps also opportunistic time to turn and shift to well-being. So appreciate you all being here. If you like what you heard, if you want to go a little deeper, please go to honehq.com. Put in promo code WELLBEING and sign up for 30 free days. Try our 15 plus courses this month. And if you're a member or leader of a team, you can also sign up 10 of your team members for a free membership. So hope to see some of you in class, in a fun, interactive class. And thanks all again for making the time, and wishing you all happiness and health and resilience and anti-fragility and all those beautiful things. Thank you again for making the time, and hope to see many of you soon. Take care, y'all. And Paige, Louis, Valorie, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Good to see everybody on the line. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tone.
You got it.